Now I'd like to introduce Dr. Rudiger Klein. Dr. Klein has made great contributions in science policy and has helped to broaden this discussion in Europe especially. He's former director of all European academies, and he had great work helping with some programs in the European Science Foundation some time ago, and now he is at the Chinese Academy of Sciences and has helped us a lot. He was with us together with Nick and other colleagues for the second BRISPE, and now he is again here. Thank you, Rudiger. I hope you have a good time here with us.
Good morning, everybody. Now, I always knew Sao Paulo is a place of hardworking people. But Sonia, pushing us through a 4-hour session in the morning without a coffee break, I mean, that really pushes it. So I see strong commitment to the cause, so that's a good thing. Brazil has joined the club, right? The club of crooks, as we heard in the previous presentation. And now, yesterday was supposed to be a day of joy and triumph for Brazilian science, but then it was overshadowed by what turned out to be a day of mourning for Brazilian politics and many Brazilian citizens. Nonetheless, let us come back to the moment of joy and triumph, because Brazil has also joined the club of the Elysium of excellence, if you like, with the awarding of the Fields Medal to one of yours, if I dare say this here in São Paulo, because after all, o autor is Carioca, born and bred, yet out of Tijuca, he has been conquering the world of mathematics, and this was out of Brazil. This was not out of Harvard, this was not out, well, a little bit out of France. It was not out of Moscow, it was out of here. So you have joined, and you have been joining in many different fields for a number of years now, the best of the best, the crème de la crème. So this club that you are joining now is one that is perhaps best captured by the motto that has been running and taking this city to greatness over a century or so. You remember that? Non ducor duco. You translate that into I shall not be led, I will be leading. Now that's the ambition the city had, that's the ambition FAPESP has for science in the state, and that's the ambition that has brought us all together in the various world conferences around the concept of research integrity. You see that I'm doing this the old-fashioned way. I will not have graphs, I will not have infographics, I will not have PowerPoints. In fact, let's just pretend this is the coffee break. Let's just pretend that we are engaging in a conversation and not in any lecture type of presentation on my part. Let's pretend that we are in a salon scientifique. Let's pretend that we are in a common room. Let's pretend that in this common room we are not gossiping about the latest gaffe of the Chancellor or about how on earth to sort out that business with the rebellious students in the cafeteria. No. Let's pretend that we spend our time in the common room thinking about what our institution, the university, is really about. Let's pretend that in that half hour that we have to share in this conversation, we talk about the heart and soul of science, of research and of education, because that is what research integrity is about. So I'm not trying to make light by not showing slides. On the contrary, I'm trying to engage you from the inside to be part of what needs to be an exercise of the scientific community for the future of science. So yes, self-regulation has to work because simply we don't have a better system. Alternative would be that someone who's not a scientist is telling you what to do and how to do it. Next thing is they will tell you what kind of science to do. Next thing they will tell you what kind of science not to do and who's allowed to be doing science. The notion of self-regulation of science, the country that I come from or the passport that I carry, which is a German passport, was violated in the most brutal way in our recent history. That's why we, and together with us, many colleagues the world over, insist on this self-regulation being the principle that has to rule our activities, or else we are steering ourselves into an area of big trouble. Now, who am I to invite you to this conversation? Sonia very kindly pointed out a few areas of responsibility that I had and where we engaged jointly in taking forward this conversation about research integrity. At the moment, I'm based at the Chinese Academy of Sciences. This is one of the most competitive scientific environments, as you know. That is one of the least transparent environments, as you probably suspect. What it is not is an environment where the public does not care. Because not a day passes that the Mandarin language, press or other media, social media, online media, you name it, or indeed the English language derivatives do not talk about cases of research misconduct. Suspected, examined, the consequences for the institutions, for the field of science, and so on and so forth. There is a public debate about this. So to come back to your question, I'm sorry I did not catch your name, but you were asking about the relevance of this debate in areas in which society concerns. The Chinese take on this is there is no area of science that does not concern society. So when there is trouble in science, society has to have a say in it. The way this is played out institutionally is something different. I don't think we can serve as a model there. You probably can, and that's why I'm very proud to be able to engage with you in this discussion again. In Europe, we had a number of high-level debates between the funders and the academies, the subject associations that defend the rights and ambitions of different disciplines. And you rightly asked the question, are those institutions representative of the science community, of the scientific communities in the different areas? It's an open question. It depends on the constitution of those organizations. If the organizations, be they academies or funding agencies, are run by governments, their claim of representing the scientific community is dubious. And the acceptance of whatever rules and regulations they put out will be based essentially on their power to dole out the research funds. That does not lead automatically to the cultural shift and cultural engagement that we need to develop among our aspiring researchers. That is a culture of dependency, not a culture of engagement with the core concepts that Nick in his presentation listed as being constitutive of research integrity. In other countries, such as this one, and in the way FAPESP is run, you can justifiably say that it's the scientific community that sets its own standards. In Europe, we have a mixed bag. We have both approaches. Who am I to invite you to this conversation? Well, to start with, I'm not someone who, if you like, does research integrity for a living. Not as a teacher primarily, not as a researcher, not as a manager. But as Sonia rightly pointed out, I've been engaged in various science policy fields where the ethics of doing science, the good practice of science, and the expectations that society and others have of science and of scientists are intimately interconnected. And I'll just give you a short list here, and you see later on in my talk how these various fields intersect with the notions of research integrity. You heard in the presentation of Dr. Brito that close to 60% of research and development in this state is conducted in industry. Who does that research? Of course, your students. Often enough, the best of them, because often enough salaries in those areas are better, and often enough the brightest go for the best salary and not necessarily for the lifelong commitment to the mediocre salary in an underfunded public higher education institution. So these are your people. trained by you. What have we been saying so far about the linkages between university, public and private on the one hand, and academic research and scientific research occurring in non-academic environments? Something we need to think about, and something where the notion that is paramount in FAPESP's approach, not just in terms of the chronology, but I take it also in terms of the priority, conceptually and morally. Education first is critical, because what? Maybe 5% of our students will end up in research positions at a university. Everybody else goes somewhere else. If they can pursue their dream of the science that they have studied, they may end up doing research in the private sector or in many of the government institutions. They may become scientific advisors of one kind or another in those institutions. A minority, a tiny little minority only, will end up as researchers. Can we conceptualize a world where those 95% do not receive an education that teaches them what responsible research is about? I don't think so. Can we therefore accept a situation where familiarity with the notions of research integrity only starts at the postgraduate level? Absolutely not, but because by then they will have left. They will have left us. They will have started pursuing careers elsewhere. Therefore, in the work that we did with the academies and the funding agencies in Europe, the European perspective, much of the emphasis was on incorporating notions of ethics and notions of research integrity into the curricula at a very early stage. And that is equally important, in a modularized way. Relevant ethical and research integrity questions, beyond the obvious, such as plagiarism, are very much discipline specific. Nick gave you the example where an entire subfield, social psychology, began to be questioned and to ask hard questions of themselves as to their research practices and what it all means, the sequence of scandals of which Stapel was only one, that shook that particular domain of science. Another area that I will delve into in some greater depth is the question of research infrastructures and big data. Here at FAPESP, you're launching large-scale support actions for work in e-science. Everybody does. That's the new world. That adds the fourth I to the four I challenges that we already had. We had interdisciplinarity, we had intersectoriality, academia, industry, we had international collaboration, and now we have the internet, the cloud somehow, that is rebuilding the ways, restructuring the ways in which we are doing science, where it does no longer matter whether our colleague sits in New Zealand or in Novosibirsk. We can still work with them on a daily basis. Now, we are talking about a technology that takes us somehow into the cloud, but we're talking about practices that are very much down to earth. Because whatever could have gone wrong along a corridor can go wrong now as well in the collaboration around the cloud, except that the kind of peer pressure that was exercised in research groups now seems to risk to evaporate somehow. So what are the rules and regulations that need to be put in place to ensure that colleagues cooperating remotely do not only not step on each other's toes, but also do not cheat each other? Because they are collaborators and they are competitors at the same way. So you can imagine extremely complex regulations trying to harmonize rules and laws and self organizing commitments across nations and disciplines, and you end up with a monster. The road forward for the new generation of researchers that you are training, that you are teaching now, that who will be your successors in a few or a few more years, is through education, reinstilling the notion of good scientific practice. That is why I'm so heartened by the approach that you have taken here in FAPESP. One focus, therefore, will be, in what I'm trying to share with you, will be on working in this data sharing environment and what it means for the science that we do. The focus on data has also another reason, and it's the following. Many clever people have spent a great deal of time coming up with extremely convincing, often enough also effective, rules and recommendations for avoiding research misconduct in the area, if you like, of processed science, the output, the outcomes. A relatively under-regulated area, and I should say thank God, is the phase in the research where you actually do the research as opposed to writing it up, analyzing it, synthesizing it, packaging it in the way that best fits your needs. When you're actually collecting and selecting data, that occurs either in the library in the case of the humanities or in the labs in the case of those of us who are scientists. That occurs often alone, often in teams. That occurs in an environment where hardly any external formalized controls are taking place. That occurs in an environment where, contrary to the claims for less peer pressure, I would like to argue we need more peer pressure, but peer pressure not of the competitive kind, peer pressure of the collaborative kind, peer pressure of the kind that would allow us to discuss early on in the process what we collect, how we collect, from whom we collect, what do we leave out, how do we process the data, how do we document the data that we have collected perhaps for the first time, how do we make sure that the data that we have collected has not already been collected and analyzed by somebody else, etc., etc., etc. The whole gamut of activities that actually make up the research cycle at that very first phase. And I'm, again, talking about very much a team approach, an intra-institutional approach, an approach that is not ruled by regulations, but by the understanding that your science gets better if you expose yourself to well-meaning criticism. A bit of an idealized approach, no doubt, but that is what science is all about. It is about a conversation that you engage in order to push knowledge forward. And yes, you have to take criticism. And yes, you better learn that early on, and not only when your paper is rejected, either for lack of quality or for lack of comprehensibility of data or for reasons that are worse. The focus of the meeting is about the institutional frameworks that need to be put in place to ensure research integrity. Here you have an arena where research leaders, where heads of institutes and departments need to consider carefully what kind of culture of exchange and collaboration they want to foster at their institutes. Second point. When we are talking about the data revolution that the very rapid developments in ICT have brought us, have given us. It's a great gift. It's a great gift. Let's not forget that. When we're talking about this revolution, we're also talking about new partnerships, not just between sectors, but also between disciplines. And we heard before, again with the comment that came from the humanities and from the social sciences, that the way we look at quality in research means facing different obstacles in different disciplines. It has to do with methodologies, it has to do with the scholarly communication that we have engaged in, it has to do with the sheer number of people, bearing in mind that social science and humanities combined resemble an ocean compared to the small lake of particle physicists and the like. We are looking, in other words, at in interdisciplinary projects and programs at the challenge of bringing together different traditions of science that only very superficially are harmonized through the digital medium, especially in this phase of transition between, if you like, a pre-digital world into a fully digitized world. The responsibility of the universities, many of whom are one way or another pushed to or heavily engaging in establishing new interdisciplinary centers, responding, yes, to society's needs, absolutely, or indeed to specific scientific challenges. The responsibility of the institutions that do that, higher education institutions, research institutions, and others, is to make sure that the distinct characters of these different fields that are brought together around big questions are respected and are reflected in the culture of scholarly communication that you develop in these settings. What's the alternative scenario? The alternative scenario is that one field is dominating, that one field is imposing its approach to publication, to exchange, to sharing, to verification, even to excellence on all other fields, with the likely result that we will not have interdisciplinary research, but poor, disciplinarily imbibed research of one sort or another. A similar problem arises, and I'm coming back to the statistics that we were given by Dr. Brito, at the level of intersectoral collaboration between academia on the one hand and industry on the other. If we stay within the challenges that the data revolution pose to good scientific practice, to good research practice, we must recognize that there are other rules that may just as well need to be respected. If you think about certain sectors of collaboration between academia and industry, you may need to factor in security concerns of national security. You may need to factor in, no doubt, in any sector, issues of copyright law and the like. Do you want to include respect for those external forces into the training of the young researchers? I would say no doubt, and as part of the continuum of good scientific practice, it has to be in there. If we look at the question of the technical frameworks that can be put in place, a lot of progress has been made. We have the rules, we have the regulations, we have an arms race in the area of plagiarism, we have fora and statements that have created a community of practice around the notion of research integrity. We have people meeting from all over the world at the world conferences, and they will come to Rio next year. The real challenge is the challenge that Dr. Brito has thrown at us, at you, who represent research organizations in the country, and that is how to incorporate the notion of research integrity and the practice of good science into curriculum. Our approach at the European end has been most definitely to work through incentives. And it has not been successful all around. Let us admit that. The phenomenon that the scientific director sketched as a typical phenomenon when he speaks to university leaders in this state is one that we have encountered as well. While the recommendations on integrating modules on research integrity into curricula, on requesting training in research integrity from researchers at all stages in their careers are received, formally welcome. The translation of this into actual training activities, into measurable success in terms of conversations that are going on about the good scientific practice, not about the scandals that have been occurring in neighboring labs, is minimal. In the data domain, we might want to have a specific look at what actually constitutes good data, just as we are looking in the publication domain at what constitutes a decent publication. The way this has been defined is through standards. One important venue here is the Research Data Alliance that you may have heard of, and that if Brazil is not yet a full member of it, it will soon become. The Research Data Alliance tries to define good data as being the raw material for the science that you will later on publish as follows. It has to be persistently identified, identifiable, and discoverable. The authenticity of the data has to be verifiable. The standards have to be field-specific, but they must be transparent. We heard about the issue of transparency in another context. And more importantly than not, whatever data is being collected needs to be stored and curated in such a way that the reproducibility, that is a claim that we may want to make for good science and for good data, can actually be carried out. This means money. This raises the question of who is going to pay. Should a university that receives research funds be expected as part of their contribution to sustaining that research at their departments, provide facilities for storing, maintaining, curating, keeping accessible such data as part of research integrity? We're talking about what measures institutions have to take if they want to be serious about research integrity. And I'm trying to focus on the data here. Is it the central library that should be fulfilling this function? Is it the institutes, which may or may not merge in the future? Is it a project that may or may not have a lifespan of a few years, a decade or less? Who, in other words, carries the responsibility for maintaining data sets that allow for verification and for reproduction of results at a later stage? If we step back for a moment, the problem, even though I will not quantify it, becomes conceptually even more tricky. Because if on the one hand we heard time and again that it is the responsibility of the researcher to adhere to what has been described as good research conduct, if on the other hand it is the responsibility of the institutions to provide resources, we have also heard that it is critical for the specific scientific cultures in different disciplines to be permeating this process. I believe that in a later presentation, Mark will tell us something about the role of the scientific associations and societies in this context. I would like to raise a couple of points here with specific focus on responsible data management. And they are essentially derived from three strands of reflections and associated publications. One that in the US was carried out with a view to getting a panorama on data practices across the disciplines. One that was carried out in the Netherlands as a reaction to the cases that Nick had referred to. And a third set of reflections that is revolving around the constitution of large-scale research infrastructures that will bring together data providers from around the globe, and that is essentially occurring in the Research Data Alliance. What we are looking at when we ask scientific societies and scientific institutions, such as universities, and in terms of input that they can provide, we get essentially 4 to 5 responses. One is, just as we want to focus on education and prevention, as we've heard it here also in the FAPESP document, we need to develop a system by which incentives carry us towards proper behavior in terms of data management rather than the threat of punishment. This means in terms of university management, this means in terms of the role that the scientific societies can play, that greater emphasis must be placed on the contribution that proper data management makes to good science. At the moment, what counts in many ways is the publication, is not the way you deal with the data, potentially exposing that very publication to external criticism. It's the same kind of openness that is cited as one of the principles in all the statements that we had seen in the table that Nick presented that needs to permeate our actions here. If attribution of data sets becomes part of the recognized achievements of a researcher and contributes to the potential career progression of a given researcher, we are entering different territory altogether. My claim would be that data will be the new form of scientific communication, of scholarly communication, and that it will be data and the sharing of data that will make or break the reputation of institutes or clusters of institutes in the future, just as the article has highlighted the fame of individuals or groups of individuals. The second point I had mentioned already earlier on, by way of a preview, is the increased peer pressure at the level of, or at the stage of data collection, selection, aggregation, disaggregation, and what have you. The way most sciences, including the human sciences and humanities, are working these days is no longer in the form of a number of lone wolves chasing whatever dream and coming up after endless years with spectacular results. We are de facto doing teamwork. Let's make sure that this teamwork turns into a truly team that works together, not just in terms of pooling resources, pooling staff time, pooling funds, occasionally creating duplicated funding indeed, but also in terms of mutual criticism, pushing each other forward by examining in the research teams themselves each other's projects, progress, and imminent results. It's happening, but it's not happening enough, and is not happening in the framework, in the language, and framed as an exercise of promoting research integrity. Measure that has been proposed in the range of documents that I'm drawing on here, and that I would like to hear your opinion on in particular, is the possibility for the overarching academic institutions to every now and again conduct random checks on their employed researchers in terms of their data management practices. Personally, I find this a little scary, but then why should I, if I'm behaving the way I'm supposed to? I guess the issue here is one of transparency and of ensuring that whoever is employed by the organization that might toy with the idea of such random checks is adequately trained and prepared for what is expected of her or him. And that requires, once again, that at the highest decision-making level in a university, in a research institution, it is understood and it is taken into account that any kind of teaching and training takes time, and if we want to give importance to the area of research integrity, if we want to train our students and future researchers and indeed future successors in this field, we need to set time aside for that. And just as Nick was suggesting, this should be not just factored in terms of the time needed, but also in terms of the authority needed. It is not good enough if these critical areas of scientific behavior, which, you remember my opening statement, are the heart and soul of what science is about, if these notions, these concepts, these practices are conveyed by a teaching assistant, sorry, not good enough. If research integrity is at the heart of the scientific enterprise, the leader needs to step in and the leader needs to step up her or his efforts in conveying that this is at the core of the institution that she or he is leading. Let me summarize briefly. I'm of the conviction, and we've tried to have this view reflected in the European documents that country by country or in various forms of associations of organizations we published, that we need to instill a culture of research integrity and not rules and technologies for combating research misconduct. Now, cultural change and cultural reinforcement of the best practice in science can fail. So you need a balanced approach to correctives. You need to rein in the risk of misbehavior and misconduct. Should this be done in a framework that takes us institutionally and intellectually outside of the domain of science, our approach would be definitely not. No. Hence, yes, a perhaps somewhat over-optimistic reliance on the cleansing forces of self-regulation. But in a very practical sense. You are all not only teachers, once upon a time students, peer reviewers, authors, you sit on committees that select or reject new colleagues, etc., etc. There is an informal level of spreading this kind of cultural rebirth, I would almost say, taking up Nick's image of an ever-increasing number of cases of misconduct that, if we take it in the other direction, would lead us to a paradisiac moment when there was no misconduct. A cultural rebirth, therefore, of this ideal world that needs to take place in everyday practice. Now, everyday practice means talking about it and talking about it and talking about it. A surefire way of scaring away our best brains out of science is talking about it in terms of scandals and dramas and broken careers and shattered dreams. So the way to talk about it is in positive terms, in terms of the vehicles of creating good science, of creating good scientific collaboration, of delivering a valuable service, as the colleague was saying, to society. Is this optimistic? Yes, it is. What in science couldn't or shouldn't be? We are, I think, at the heart of our institutions and the heart of our being, educators. So let's stick to that also in this particular context. In practical terms, emphasis needs to be put on instilling this spirit of research integrity at the phase that so far has remained least, if you like, contaminated by other forms of external control. That's the phase when you're actually doing research, be it in the library or being in the lab, collecting, selecting, analyzing data. Not in the form of more control, not in the form of more rules, but in the form of critical conversations as daily and indeed best practice. The issue of research integrity, if it is understood as being at the heart of the scientific enterprise, needs to bring together, when it comes to responsible data management, a variety of actors in a university. And I'm coming back to what are the institutional frameworks that we need. It is inconceivable that a library alone, for example, can put forward a sustainable and a realistic plan for data management for an entire university. Because an entire university is an immensely diverse place that is not, cannot be reduced to shelf meters in the former times, or indeed now to bits and bytes. What I would argue for is that the issue of responsible data management might be the arena in which, due to the potential high costs that responsible data management will incur, the arena in which, due to the high costs, a university can form this new culture of research integrity by investments, because the investments into curation will be much higher than any investment into teaching time and into setting aside hours or days or weekends of postgraduate seminars. I think it is worthwhile remembering also in this context that there is a role that organizations such as FAPESP have to play here. It is not that of a controlling or monitoring agency, but it is that role of a, shall we say, guarantor that what is public money, including your money, you pay for FAPESP with your taxes in many ways, a guarantor for the sound spending of public money. Most of the universities, many of the research institutions that we're talking about here are equally public institutions. How can we possibly see a contradiction between the ambitions of one organization and the other to reinforce research integrity practices? Why not, therefore, wholeheartedly embrace the very broad, very inclusive, and in many ways simple requests that, as funders, FAPESP puts to you, those of you who operate in the state of Sao Paulo? Why not wholeheartedly using this encouragement that they put forward, because that's what it is, with the brochure on good scientific practices, and make it the cornerstone of your institutional arrangements in promoting research integrity. The challenge that you as universities and FAPESP as a funder are facing are not going to become any less in the future. The competition that you've entered and that you've so triumphantly shown to be a serious player in with the Fields Medal, that competition is a worldwide one. The moment the stories that Nick listed, the many stories out of 2013 and 2014, become the kind of stories that define the public image of science in Brazil, you will have a a serious problem as a country, as universities, as funders who want to attract foreign brilliant brains and send the best ones for a while abroad. That's why collectively, as a nation and as a state, it's your responsibility to work together on these issues. Why did I focus on data? Because data is the 21st century. That is something that needs to be constructed anyhow, and you need to give thought to it anyhow. FAPESP is going to set up huge programs in e-science anyhow, so why not use that particular arena and build here something that can be, if you like, the moral, the practical foundation for the Brazilian global universities of the 21st century. Thank you very much.
Rudiger, as a science policy expert, you noticed when the World Science Forum was being organized, there were 7 preparatory meetings that were held here in Brazil. And for all these meetings, it was said that research integrity will be included, in the discussions that we had here. And that's what happened when we had the World Science Forum, and then you were there and Nick was there, and the topic was high on the agenda. My question is, what we have noticed is that the topic of research integrity is very close to the topic of science policy, and for many countries it has some place, and it may be true if you consider that there is a concern about this topic in the Global Research Council, and they started discussing research integrity together with other issues such as merit review and other important topics, which to a certain extent are related to science policy. And many countries are involved in this discussion. My question for you, from the perspective of science policy, how do you compare what you see here in Brazil in terms of concerns about research integrity and the relationship with science policy, when you compare Brazil, for example, to other countries in the BRICS, if you compare to Russia or India or China or South Africa, what kind of similarities and differences you see, for example, India, China, Brazil, when you consider these interactions for research, for economic models and everything, how do you compare the systems in terms of initiatives to foster a culture of research integrity and its relationship with science policy?
Well, I thought I had given some praise to Brazil already, but I can do it again if you want to hear it, because that is truly the case. I mean, if we take the BRICS countries, essentially, when it comes to the question of proactively, creatively, constructively, and inclusively dealing with research integrity, you're by far the forerunner. Absolutely no doubt about it when it comes to the BRICS countries. If I compare this document that we were introduced to this morning, that you're all familiar, of course, to many of the documents that we have in Europe, this is practical, this is hands-on, this gives concrete guidance, and it just about covers everything that needs to be covered in this kind of document. In my view, it is more comprehensive than many of the other documents. It is for you to judge whether it serves the purpose, because it is for you to see at your organization whether the good intentions that are expressed here, which are all the right intentions, educação, prevenção, and only then investigação, is whether the good intentions correspond to the reality. It is for you to perhaps also criticize and say, well, we are happy to introduce educational matters, but dear FAPESP, we cannot do this with no resources, or dear CNPq, or dear whoever, CAPS, or whoever. That would be one way of dealing with the criticism that was thrown at you in terms of implementation. If I see what we learned this morning, about conditions here in Sao Paulo state, which may or may not be different from the rest of the country. What I also see is that many of the frustrations that we had with the GRC document. GRC is the Global Research Council, which brings together some, 80 or so national funding agencies from around the globe, essentially the heads of those agencies who are debating some policy measures on career development, on peer review, or indeed on research integrity. Essentially, as it stands, it's a talking shop. They do not yet fund research jointly. It may go in that direction one day. We are trying to push, but they are big guys, they don't like to be pushed. When I say we are trying to push, that was from the Academies of Sciences. Because we feel funders need to fund. I mean, it's also good if they talk, but essentially they need to fund. Now, if I compare what we learned this morning to the work that has been done by the GRC and the document that has been produced, you will notice easily we're talking about, 20 pages here of relatively detailed reflections and recommendations, and a single page of very general ideas on research integrity on the part of the Research Council. The issue is perhaps one of the parties that were involved in leading the process, because the way the GRC process had been set up involved regional consultations. So you must imagine that all the funding agencies in Latin America talked about this amongst themselves. Those in Africa talked among in Asia, in Europe, etc. Which gives you 5 sets of compromises. And then all representatives of all these groups, it's almost like the UN, then representatives of all these groups come together, and I think they came together here in Brasilia, to create a new compromise out of 5 compromises. So you end up with a fairly anodyne document. Nonetheless, the document, short though as it may be, contains some of the key elements for action that you have translated into action here in FAPESP. It speaks about the promotion of a culture of research integrity, not just measures to monitor and to punish, if you like. It speaks to the importance of education, and if you dig deeper, what you see is education that starts essentially at the BA level and leads up all the way into the world of senior researchers. And it speaks to the responsibility of cooperation, that was the note on which I ended, between those who, if you like, do higher education and research at the universities and elsewhere, and those who fund. And it's fora such as this that we would like to see emerge country by country, where those who are at the forefront of implementing all these lofty ideas engage with those who try to put down in as simple a set of recommendations as possible what is desirable in this field. So basically the answer is I see Brazil very much at the forefront, certainly if Brazil is reflected by what we learned this morning. I think the occasion of having the meeting here, the World Conference here in next year, will drive home this point to all of those who are not familiar with the local situation and the efforts that you have already made. And once again, a great deal of the merit for all of this, Sonia, goes to you. So thank you very much.
Thank you for your nice talk. My name is José Lapa Silva from the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. I would like to talk about this question of data management and data sharing that you said is the new paper for the future. Yeah, next 21st century will be on data rather than being on publications, right?
Let's see.
Let's see, yeah. Well, but there is already money flowing from the largest funding agency for sorts of things you are describing. We just got one from the NIAID and NIH. That's to build large partnerships, networks of researchers around, it's mainly Brazil and India, that the main issue is exactly to set large data sets and specimen repositories for research in TB and AIDS, tuberculosis and AIDS. That's my field. The big question that we have not yet answered is exactly how we're going to deal with all sorts of problems will emerge from this sort of new situation, that we have data available, we have specimens available, but we have to build the question of conflict of interest, confidentiality, access to this data banks, that these things are still to be answered. We still don't know how to deal with that. And I just want to remind you that the largest of repositories in the world are with the big pharma companies, and they don't allow anybody to touch the data because this is big bucks. So this is still a question that we will need to discuss in terms of research integrity and best practices, because there are still a lot of problems around this issue.
That was pretty much the kind of constellation that I had in mind when I was suggesting that perhaps rather than focusing primarily on the somewhat restructured form of scholarly communication that we have inherited from the last 2 or 3 centuries, if we need to build new structures, if we are truly talking about educating the next generation of researchers in terms of research integrity, researchers who will live and grow in this digital world, why not focus on the issue of responsible data management, and that includes all those tricky and thorny issues that you mentioned. How do we deal with public-private partnerships, or otherwise with the work of researchers, former students of ours, who ended up in the private sector, in the pharmaceutical industry, and who have all sorts of good reasons, commercially speaking, to be very cagey when it comes to data sharing, and who in many ways adhere to a different set of priorities and perhaps even to a different set of what it means to behave in an ethical way. The reality is that more and more research will be conducted in partnerships that stretch beyond academia proper. The reality is also that in many fields, it is not the private and commercial sector who is the main partner, but it is it's other agencies in the public sector. Again, coming back to what Nick has highlighted as one of the big challenges in the future, that is, how can we translate a debate and reflections and plans for action that are very mature and very advanced in the field of biomedical sciences into the area of socioeconomic research. When we are talking big data, we are also talking big government data. Big government data is of all sorts. It comes out of all sorts of formats and institutions that input such data, and much of it will not be the kind of data that we have been dealing with in the biomedical or physical sciences. Much of it will be social science data. How are we going to deal with that in the future? The diversion away from the end of the research cycle, if you like, if there is an end to a cycle, it's a bit of a contradiction in terms, truly, namely the publications, into the early phase, and then the focus on the data revolution and what it all means for the way we do our jobs as scientists, was primarily one that looked at at a sensible way of letting university leaders understand why it is a good thing to invest time into education and research integrity. Why is it a good thing? Because we have to rethink in this data revolutionized world, we have to rethink the way we do science anyhow. So let's do it on an articulate and explicit foundation of what good science ought to be. And we have it in the catalogs. Yeah? So that's why I think it's a good thing that there are a number of technical enterprises underway, but it's a rare opportunity for institutions, universities, that care about research integrity to build that concept anew, the concept of doing science in a responsible way, around different work practices.
I was going to raise the big data from another perspective, but I'll come at it from this one as well. You emphasize the importance of self-regulation, and yet this is an area in which there's a huge conflict of interest. So, as a historian of science, anytime I see the term big, I'm suspicious. Because what does big mean? Big means big money. It is a way science uses to justify going back and asking for money. You thought research was expensive before, but we now have to do big data sets. And you repeatedly see this being used as a strategy within science to increase science budgets. It may be reasonable to do that, but then to do that without raising the integrity issues that were just raised seems to me to be a gross mistake. But the scientific community has a conflict of interest in raising that. It doesn't want to raise the difficult issues, it wants to raise the others. And I'll give you an example of this, is that I just testified before the Bioethics Commission on the new brain initiative in the US, big brain initiative. And I asked, can I raise some of these integrity and social issues? Well, they really didn't want those. They wanted the more difficult ethical issues to look at. So there's a conflict within interest within the community, and I think therefore these things have to in some way move out so there's objective use, because otherwise you won't get these issues raised.
I wonder whether conflict of interest is analytically speaking, is a helpful phrase here. There are certainly interests. I'm not sure we need to see them as conflicting interests. Let's take first this small sector of big data that is, if you like, science related. When I talk about big data, I'm talking about the data that is generated commercially by governments outside of any scientific intentions, but perhaps at one point subjected to scientific inquiry. Huh? I'm talking about that. I'm not talking about data generated out of research projects, be they in astronomy or in brain science. So that's, maybe we need to clarify that first. Second, we are in the process of reflecting about a better way of producing even better science. As if we are convinced that that is what we are doing, and we're not just protecting our jobs, and I actually am convinced that that is what we are doing, then it is not illegitimate to say, sorry, here is a list of challenges for the future. We've tried to think it through as best as possible, and this is the price tag we need to put to it. Then you enter into the kind of conversation that the colleague who now just left raised early on, namely, how do we involve non-scientific actors in these debates? They may raise ethical issues of a very different kind that has got nothing to do with the ethics of science. So I'm not quite sure we see a conflict of interest here, or we need to see a conflict of interest. If, that is, we are serious about the matter of research integrity. And that is, I think, your key message, your core message. Yeah? Because if we are not, then it's lobbying poor, then it is not only a conflict of interest, but it is a niche activity to attract some extra funds. The scenario that I was trying to sketch was a different one, was a more positive and optimistic one, was one that would not primarily see those trying to manipulate the system, but those trying to improve the system. I still believe in that being possible, and I think that is the philosophy that underlies what we've heard here early in the morning, and what in the end we are all striving to achieve by emphasizing education over a free reign for everybody, and punishment as we discover misdemeanors and outright misconduct.
I'm Mark Frankel. I'm visiting from the United States. A number of interesting threads in this conversation, Rudiger. I think you've done a good job of pursuing some of them. I only want to return to one that was raised a moment earlier about the industry and the data. They're very big players in all of this. It's not just in the life sciences. There's the IBMs, there's Googles, et cetera. So they're very big. It's a very good point. But I think here's an opportunity where there's an alliance to be made between government, the scientific community, and the public. The pharmaceuticals in particular are under a lot of pressure because of the health issues that are associated with this, but a lot of public pressure to share and to be more open. And we have certainly witnessed, both here and in Europe, increasing efforts by the pharmaceutical companies to respond by entering into consortiums with universities and governments, and basically agreeing to a sharing plan that is certainly much more robust than anything you've seen in the past from them. So I would suggest that this is a really good example for the scientific community to join with the public, make your case that this data sharing is absolutely essential for advancing science and public welfare, and also work with governments who can help fund those kinds of consortiums. And I think that's one way, if you will, of approaching the 21st century of big data. You're absolutely right. There are a lot of different players. There are a lot of different RI, research integrity issues, so forth and so on. Industry has to be a part of it. And I think there's a good opportunity to make that happen sooner rather than later, given what I'm seeing, at least in the United States and in Europe, in terms of how the industry is reacting to some of this public pressure. They really are being more and more open than they have been in the past, because the pressures are there to make them do so. And it's working. I think it's working slowly but surely. So I wish you well in your endeavor, because I think that's one way of approaching, seeing the public as an ally in moving forward.
Absolutely, and that in a sense brings us also back to the question of the conflicts of interest, because here you might very well have a conflict of interest. So do you reject a collaborative proposal from one of the industry giants as a university if that partner, that potential partner and very, very powerful partner is rejecting outright the request for adhering to what has become institutionally your best practice in terms of openness about data, for example? That is a conflict of interest. Now, the way this may sound polemical, but I think it's just a simple truth of life. The way industry deals often enough with its academic partners is that it finds ways to exploit their strengths, but also their weaknesses. And the weaknesses, often enough, is that institutions and individuals act in isolation, not collectively. The proposal that I try to submit to you to form an alliance around the concept culture of research integrity is for a collective institutional movement that would give you, in the science-intensive state of Sao Paulo, all of a sudden a kind of leverage that individually, university department by university department, you would never have. If you all, together with the strongest public sector science foundation in the state, can say this is how we want to do science in our state, in our community, let's see what the negotiating position might be. Again, has it been tried before? I'm not sure it has. Is it worth trying out, given the pressure you would be subjected to otherwise? I certainly think so. So here you have a conflict of interest that can actually be resolved by proactively embracing this opportunity that the new form of doing research in the fully digitized environment presents to us. Nonetheless, all the challenges that you listed are there right next to the opportunities. But it is a new world out there. It is the new world that our students will be working in, and we are best advised to make sure that they learn early on how to think about the way they want to shape that world. Because let's be clear about that as well. Most of us come from the pre-digital world. Our ideas about the future are certainly different from the ideas of our students and our best postdocs even. Therefore, there's only so much advice that we can give. The best advice that we can give is that of a flawless track record. That's why the research leaders, those who are recognized worldwide in their field and who have made it to the top in their local and national hierarchy of academia, are so important as messengers for the notion of research integrity.
Thank you very much, Rudiger. I think that's a good note to end on, and there are a couple of announcements before we disappear for lunch.
Bom, boa tarde a todos. Obrigada aqui pela participação para essa segunda rodada de discussões. Eu vou convidar a professora Debora Foguel, que é pró-reitora de pós-graduação e pesquisa da Universidade Federal do Rio de Janeiro, que vai compartilhar conosco algumas ações que a UFRJ tem desenvolvido nessa área de integridade em pesquisa e com o intuito também de estimular os participantes aqui a pensarem também um pouco mais sobre alguns modelos que podem ser implementados. Então, o título da apresentação da professora Debora é Research Integrity at Brazilian Universities, the Case of the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro.
So, good afternoon, everybody. I would like to thank you very much for the invitation to share with you the experience that we are having at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. Of course, I would like to thank very much Sonia and the other organizers, and also FAPESP to host and to foster this is very important meeting. So, differently from the two former speakers, I'm not an expert in this subject. So I'm just a professor in Federal University. Of course, I'm a researcher, and I was invited for the present rector, president of the university, to be the provost of research and graduate studies. But as you probably know, being in universities in general, and especially in Brazil, this theme, so the research integrity, we don't have not yet, these things organizedly, institutionally organized in our university. So since I got this position, in general, I received a call. Unfortunately, I don't have features or numbers or statistics regarding what's going on, what's happened in terms of integrity at my university. I'm thinking that is in general. I don't have statistics regarding cases among the undergraduate students, neither in the graduate courses and PhD degrees that was with problems. Unfortunately, we don't have these statistics because probably mainly some of the problems they are solved at home, inside, in the department or the institution. Some of them, I don't know why, they decide to call the provost, please, we have this situation, come here and help us. And I was kind of alone, just with myself, to to give hints and to make a judgment what this or that student or professor should happen to in this specific situation. So, of course, as you imagine, this is not a comfortable position to have each case a solution, depends on it's sunny or raining, so it's not good to, it was disturbing me a lot. But I'm very fortunate because I have a group of people around that's here in this first row, that's Sonia, Marta, Watanabe, Lapa, and 2 or 3 more around, that was at the same time simultaneously with me thinking about this problem, and was just fortunate that we just met and we decided to organize something more in terms of the institution, to have this much organized, a committee, a place that we can discuss all these cases and where the people can come to ask and to, and mainly, I guess that in my point of view, the most important part of what we are doing there, we are just about to start, is to try to educate people, as you mentioned very nicely, to put the sun in this, because the sun is the best as we say, the sun is the best antimicrobial agent that we have. So put light in these themes is the best that we can do, to discuss since the beginning. So then that's what moved me to do this. So just briefly to the one that doesn't know about my university, Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, UFRJ. So just a very, very brief overview to have an idea what its age. So it's the largest and the oldest university in country. It was created and founded in 1920 by the union of 2 schools. So in 1937, it received a new name, a new reorganization, including more faculties. And just in 1965, it received its present name. That's the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. So it's the largest federal university in country. And as you see here, we have 4 main campi. So one that's very new, that's in the north part of the state of Rio de Janeiro. So this is a very important area because around 90% of the oil and gas from Brazil pass through this area. So this is an area that's very rich and poor at the same time. So as you know, the petroleum and gas companies, they bring together with them the poorest part of the story. But also we have 3 main campuses very close by. The main one is the Cidade Universitária, that University City, and we have another one, Xerém and Praia Vermelha, that's the oldest one, close to the Sugarloaf. Regarding numbers, features about our university, we have more than 150 undergraduate courses, around 40,000 undergraduate students. Regarding the graduate programs, we have more than 100 graduate programs that all of them are on my duty, so I have to take care of all these courses, plus the research activities around the university, around almost 10,000, more than 10,000 students enrolled in these programs. And in terms of evaluations, we have around 35% of our course high level, grade 6 and 7. So, and in terms of research, so of course we are very large, and I'm just giving you a hint and a taste what the most developed areas we have. So we have the ocean basin, that's very important and help Brazil a lot to develop all the pre-salt technology. We have the hybrid bus. Now, all this is mainly developed by INCOPI, that's represented here by Professor Watanabe. So we are very proud of all these achievements. But also we have the National Museum of Brazil that's located there. So it's a very old one, created by the King of Portugal Portugal when he came in 1980. And also we have a very huge and very strong science park that's inside the island where the university is. Besides, I can give you an example. We have the National Center for Bioimaging and Structural Biology that's, has the state-of-art equipment to the biology and medicine field. So that's just an overview what UFRJ is. And another important thing is that we host the first BRISPE because, as I mentioned, so there are several professors there that are really interested in worried about this problem. So we host the first BRISPE, and then the second one, and as a result of this second BRISPE that we host, we have this joint statement of research integrity. Now that was written there, and it was a very, I would say that this was a good fruit of this meeting that was held there. So, and then comes the council that I would like to describe to you today. So it's the Research Ethics Advisory Council, Câmara Ética de Ética em Pesquisa, that's the name that we call CTEP, CTEP, so of our university. And in terms of how it fits in the organogram of our university, so this is my office where I am, the provost division. So I have above me a graduate council, and our council is kind of connecting all the actions related to the science integrity, research integrity now goes, and we discuss all these subjects here. And it's attached to myself and also to this council that's above me. So the rationale behind what we decide to do was just because of our growing concern about ethical issues in doing and communicating academic research, accountability in science. We are worried with ethical standards, there's responsibility among staff, students, junior and senior researchers, and most important, that's here in all red letters, recognition by our university that the quality of its teaching and research contribution locally and globally depends on academic integrity. So that was what moved this group of people. I would say that the majority, or almost them, but Sonia and 2 or 3 more people, they are just interested in this subject. They are not experts, but they want to contribute to create an atmosphere where we can discuss this in our institution. So that's, I'm the president, but only for one more year, because next year I leave the, I'm not going to be, we are going to have another election, look, we have elections for presidents of the university in Brazil, so we are going to have elections for the next reitor, and of course the next one is going to bring a new team, and I'm not going to be there, but anyhow, right now I'm the president of this committee, and of course Sonia is vice coordinator, and Marisa, that unfortunately couldn't come today, she is the coordinator. And I would like to really acknowledge these 2 wonderful women that just are amazing people that's helping me a lot to, to construct all these ideas in UFRJ. So Sonia, thank you very much. I would like to publicly acknowledge you, all your work and everything that have been done for our university, not only for myself. And so the members of our committee is myself, the provost, and we have around 30 people, again, just people that are using their time to meet together and to discuss and try to implement all these actions in our university. So they are faculty, technical staff, students, and everything. I would like just to stress one important point that I will come back to this issue at the end of my talk, is that a new member that just arrived in our committee, that was an undergraduate student who copied the I don't know if monograph, okay, so it's an undergraduate that does finish history course, and she defended his monograph, and she copied everything 100% from, from a friend. She was caught and lost her degrees. And I invited her to work with us at the committee. So now she's going to be incorporated, and she's going to help us in doing all the actions, not as a castigo, how punishment, but you know, I saw that maybe to work closely to us would be important things, at least for her to think about. So she is now with us. She's going to stop. She's going to begin her work with us very soon. It happened just a few weeks ago, and so we are organized in 6 subcommittees. So as written here, so one is devoted to research involving human subjects. The second one, research integrity and responsible conduct of research, use of animals in teaching and scientific experiments, biosafety and teaching and research, access to biodiversity, genetic resources, and associated knowledge. So biodiversity, as you imagine, is a very important question in a country like Brazil. In all countries, environment is very important, biodiversity is very important, and in Brazil we have to, in fact, we have horrible rules, and they are just changing right now, the rules for the use of, to access biodiversity. And also the last one, the 6th one, is the relationship between our university and industry, innovation, intellectual property. So the 30 people, they are divided into these 6 subcommittees. So this is just a picture showing the council and the 6 subcommittee. And of course, this subcommittee, they work together, like in the case of this one, work with our agency of innovation. So we have also local animals commissions that work together with the subcommittee of our council, and so on. So that's our organization. So here's just a summary of what each working group works with. So we have a coordinator of each one of this subcommittee, a vice coordinator, and again, our main concern, what unified all us, is the education, actions that we plan to do together. So, in terms of the research on human subjects, so this is just to summarize what this specific subcommittee is looking for, is working on. So, guidelines for research and students to use these systems. That's the Brazilian SEP Connect system, designed to research ethic courses and education materials, by meetings. And regarding the second subcommittee, that's integrity and responsible conduct. So here is a list of concern. What this subcommittee, I don't think it's necessary, but they are what you expect that a committee like this would focus on. So that's the third one, the research with animals. So we have policies to guideline the researchers that needs and use animals. And the fourth one is the biosafety. So again, guidelines, procedures, creation of biosafety committee at the units and locally, and again, develop educational activities regarding this specific topic. The biodiversity, again, it's specific aims. So seminars, workshops, and regulations. So we are kind of discussing and understanding. They are so complicated, the Brazilian rules, the regulations. So we are just trying to learn how they work and to spread them among the university community. And the last one, so the industry, university industry cooperation. Again, here's the list of aims or interest of this specific subcommittee. We have the science park just close by us, so we have this contact very, very frequently between these companies and the researchers from our university. So this is just ongoing and future actions. So, and the first one that's just to be launched very soon in September. We are just finishing a directive for academic integrity. And we have on construction our app website that's probably is going to be ready very soon. And we have just signed, and I don't know exactly, with other universities from the state of São Paulo or even from Brazil, they are aware about the Turnitin. We have just signed this platform that's very interesting, and we are going to apply it since the 1st September to all universities. We just bought 50,000 signatures, so all professors, all students, everybody, we are going to use this platform. We signed for 6 months because, in my point of view, we have to discuss deeply what we are going to do with the uncovered FFP cases. So that's a problem for our council because now we have an instrument, a very powerful instrument that we can check and then we can at least put light, tools to put lights on this subject broadly in our university. So we are organizing a third forum, and again train the trainees and the seminars, and also we are trying to find and to look for supports, institutional support for our committee to develop mechanisms to tackle misconducts and other unethical practice at a UFRJ community. And CETEP, our committee is still evolving, so again, educational actions, we are really concentrate on that. And again, just to stress again that we need to have an administrative structure to make the whole university understand the role and importance of this type of committee. So, and then just finishing, that's the last, or no, there is one more slide. I just want to call your attention. I just read in Science, July 2014, a very nice, it's a survey with young scientists that Science did. There is this site that I invited you to visit because it's very interesting. Science is listening to the young scientists around the world. Several young scientists, they are very concerned about ethics and misconduct in research. So I just picked some of them that are very nice to read. How clever, how nice. They know exactly what they have to concentrate. They concern. So one of them, how we can communicate promise of novelties in biotechnology and avoiding the hype. So that's a problem that we have to tackle. Why not catch the criminal before they committed the crime? So that's from this specific young researcher. In China, there was a Chinese young researcher that mentioned most universities did not offer courses concerning scientific integrity or code of scientific conduct. So are we teaching our students how to code someone, how they should use a figure, a graph from? I don't think so. I'm completely sure that's not only in China that's happening. This is missing. I'm sure in Brazil we also need to concentrate more effort on this. In genetic research, it's still likely that I will encounter incidentally findings on cancer, cystic fibrosis, Alzheimer's. Should I contact the sample provider? So that's a question, I guess, that we touch a little bit this in the morning sections. How do we achieve consensus among research, pharmaceutical industries? So very nice. I really encourage you to give a look on this interesting young people, young researchers that they are thinking about and expressing their opinion and concerns on these topics. And at the end, since I mentioned before, I was very involved in this case, a recent case of plagiarism at the UFRJ that I mentioned, the students that now is working with us in the council. I just want to leave you with few questions that is on my mind, but these students, so of course our students, the next generations of research, so I'm very concerned how we can prepare the next generation, our students, to all these important themes that we are discussing during this meeting. So this specific case that I mentioned was discussed at the University Council, the most important council of the university. I don't know why. I guess that there was a problem during the process of the conduction of this process inside the Institute of History, and then decided to send this problem to the most important council of the university. And we all debated this specific case, this plagiarism with these students there. It was like a section devoted to the theme. What I like very much, because you know, the most important council of a university just losing a morning to discuss this subject, for me was very interesting. The decision of the most important council of our university was the student lost the degree, so we just collect, or we take her degrees in history, but the council decided to readmit her in the university, giving her an opportunity to write again, rewrite a new monography, and I suggested, as I mentioned, that she should work with us at the council. So that was my contribution to this specific case. One thing that changed a lot the thoughts, the conduction of the case, during this process, there was a letter from the students who committed the plagiarism, apologizing publicly for her misconduct and describing all her suffering after she was caught. She visited all her professors asking for excusing, and she described that he lost all her friends. And she has suffering a lot, more than a year, visiting everyone from her institute. And this letter touched a lot all the council. So I have questions about this specific case that I want to share with you. So should these students, or students in general, have another opportunity? I mean, is there should we apply the same castigo, sanctions, is that to an undergraduate, to a master, to a PhD, or to a professor? I don't know. I really don't know the answer. Was her crime already paid with all her suffering plus loss of her degree? So this student deserves anything else more than what she had got from the case? What else could we do? In a university, so we are an education institution, what would be the best method of education, mainly for undergraduate students? A new opportunity or no opportunity? What we should teach to this specific girl? Do we teach adequately our students about research integrity, about how they should cite someone else's work? Is honesty something to be taught? I don't know. I really don't know. And the last that I think that's most important, do we spend enough time reading the projects, the exams, the monograph, theses from our students in order to stimulate them to be creative, to send them signs that we care about what they write, So I guess that we have also, as professors, as research, to rethink our lack of time in terms of time that we spend with our students. So I don't know what is our participation in all this story. So thank you very much.
Thank you for your nice talk. I really appreciate it because the questions that you are having right now is what we are having at the University of Brasilia. We just tried this Turnitin and the Authenticate, which is another version of the software. And we think that this is definitely a Pandora box. Because at the moment that we start to give it to everyone at the university, I'm sure professors will search for other papers of other professors, and they may find slight symbols of misconduct and things that even sometimes we as Brazilians think that it may not be, for example, like self-plagiarism. I was just aware that self-plagiarism is a problem when I first published a review paper that I had to ask for permission to put in the paper pictures that I have done in other papers. So at that point I realized it's not okay to put in other papers results that I myself have created in the past. So there are several points that I think is not clear at this time in Brazilian academy. And this kind of software like Turnitin may review things not only from now on, but from now and into the past. And so we at the University of Brasilia are definitely moving ahead with that because I think it's the future. But I am also concerned with this, what kind of issues we are going to bring with that. And it's not only the situation of a student that did plagiarism and may lose the degree, but for example, what about the professor who has his degree and is teaching for a long number of years? What will happen? Would he have to give back his degree and then give back to the government the money that he received for all this time as a PhD? Because his title is not his, right? And this situation is actually happening right now. We had a situation where a professor that's a professor for more than 15 years in another university in Brazil, it was caught as a plagiarism from another thesis, and now she's being on trial, and one of the punishments is to give back the money, all the money she received because of the title. So I think it's important that all universities in Brazil, or a big pool of that, try to bring this issue in a more joint way, and I think this kind of meeting is very important in this, and try to solve the problem the way it is here in Brazil, to try to make it more a tropical solution, because I think we have very particular situations here that are not in the United States or in countries in Europe. So my question to you is, in this approach that UFRJ is taking, will this software be available only to professors or to professors and students as well? Turnitin.
So we bought 50,000, yes, and so a license, yes. As I understood, so once a professor decides to use it in a course, so all the students, they have to have their own license to upload all the work, exams, everything. All the course is gonna run inside this huge platform. So that's why we bought, and it's very cheap. Price is not the big deal. It's really cheap to have this. So we signed for 50,000 license signatures and for 6 months, and it was you know, we didn't need the procurador, so it was so cheap that was below 8,000 reais, so we don't need to pass all through the nightmare that's the Brazilian. So that was something that we loved. Cheap, it means fast, no, very fast things. No, because you don't need to go to the lawyers of the university to ask them permission. So as you probably know, this is killing us.
You may need to go back to them when we start to find the plagiarism outcomes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I'm very glad that you talk, and so this team is very nice because it unites all us, so all areas. We invite anyone from any area, and they are ready to go to the committee, so we can unite our university. We have here friends from Minas Gerais, and I'm sure from São Paulo, and I guess that we can act collectively, because this is really a subject that unify us.
The efficacy of Turnitin, I think, depends on having a big data bank of texts to compare the ones that the students produce. So, you need lots of people downloading, uploading these.
Yeah, so the professors and the students, they need to give a permission. All the work can be sent to this huge bank, the World Bank, because so if a professor use the same, let's say, the same work, they give the same work to the students in the next year, so they can compare the answers from the last semester with the program can say, oh, this is exactly the same answer that we received, but you have to, to let them, compile all the data. It's powerful. And translate, if you have in Portuguese, they translate into English and said, so this is 90% translated from this material, English, Portuguese, so it's amazing. So the person that sells it, so she went to UFRJ and, did a demo, and I would really recommend you all guys from university to invite this person from the Turnitin to demonstrate the powerful. But as I mentioned, so you cannot just buy and give a number to each one of our professors. We are going to be in trouble. So you have to be this together with other actions. That's what we are trying to construct in our council. We are going to release this, but we need at least to think about what we are doing.
Other questions?
Pode perguntar em português, eu te respondo em português.
Entender o inglês eu entendo, o problema é falar depois de muito tempo sem falá-lo. É uma experiência que eu tive quando coordenava um curso de mestrado na área de saúde coletiva. Não sei se cabe nesse fórum a pergunta que eu vou te fazer. Vocês têm algum mecanismo para detectar e tentar coibir essas empresas que vendem os trabalhos, para quais os alunos encomendam um trabalho, inclusive com um pedido da empresa que é contratada para fazer esse trabalho, sobre a bibliografia e trabalhos recomendados pelo próprio orientador? Vocês têm como detectar isso?
The question is about things that the kids buy from a commercial on.
Isso mesmo.
Ghostwritten.
We don't have, a gente não tem prevention, nenhuma prevenção. The only way, a única maneira é se uma coisa dessa acontece, você tem um comitê ou alguém que esteja atento e detecte. Eu espero que na UFRJ não tenhamos nenhum caso de comprado. Deve ter, mas eu prefiro... Deixa eu acreditar que não tem lá. Pelo menos por mais um ano.
É o manto diáfano da fantasia.
Não, mas a gente não tenho. Eu não tenho nenhuma Eu recebo e-mails às vezes, né? Vende-se monografias. Né? Agora a gente está brigando também tem chegado muito, não sei se também para vocês, mas vários diplomas para reconhecer de universidades de fim de semana do Paraguai. É uma coisa assim, inacreditável. Isso é muito, isso eu sei porque todos. Isso eu tenho.
Paraguai não, eu recebi dos Estados Unidos.
Cursos de fim de semana. Sim, nós estamos com alguns, enchem mãos. Esses a gente pega, porque como precisa é central, é centralizado, precisa que o conselho máximo reconheça o diploma. Então, a gente tem puro controle. Agora, esses outros que são locais, ou o coordenador, ou o orientador, alguém fica atento lá no lugar, mas a nível, eu não tenho olhar, não tenho como...
She's bringing up another problem, which is diploma mills, which she calls programs of weekend programs that give diplomas, master's and doctor's degrees. We receive, the University Council receives these theses for accrediting, to be read and accredited. And the problem is to know where they came from and if they actually did the coursework and all that stuff. Takes a lot of time.
Maybe a comment more than a question. And Nick is always good for horror stories about the arms race when it comes to plagiarism, and I think the example of the commercially sold papers is a good example because the one thing that you can be sure of is that in their calculations of their business model, they also factor in the very cheap costs of Turnitin. And they use it exactly the other way around, so that you will precisely not detect in the commercially purchased product that it actually is a compilation of all sorts of things, because they do it more cleverly. That's why you pay for it, instead of investing your own time. So that's not even, that's in a sense, it's a solution, it's a criminal solution to the problem, because the tools that are used by the universities might not detect the specific efforts that have gone into that product. Now, you spoke about the excellent salesmanship of the people from Turnitin, and yes, they are very good. But it might be worthwhile to take a serious look at a variety of products. There have been studies around now for 5 or 6 years that actually critically examine the sustainability of the various approaches that underlie the different tools that are on offer. Mm-hmm. And again, I mean, especially if collectively as Sao Paulo or even Brazilian universities, you intend to move as a group. You have all the power in the world to let them come and compare and allow you to compare. Plus, bring in those people who have done the comparative research. Yeah. My knowledge only reaches until about 3 years back. Nick might be familiar with the more recent work in that domain, and I'm sure both of us can share the literature that exists.
Yeah. Thank you for the advice. Well, we are aware about all these other tools. That's why we signed only for 6 months to have, yes, then we are going to see how it's going to work, to look around a little bit and to study and to see if you renew it again.
Thank you. Thanks for a wonderful talk. I wanted to go back to the young lady who you've given a second chance to and talk a little bit about that issue. We face that in the U.S. as well. We call it rehabilitation, in the sense, is there a chance rehab?
So exactly.
My own approach to this is in principle, yes. I mean, people make mistakes for all sorts of reasons. But I think you have to look at these at sort of a case-by-case basis. So on the one hand, I would say it would be nice for the university and any other organization involved to say, in principle, we'll look at a case and see if it deserves another chance. And I think there are different criteria that you would use. A 60-year-old professor who has had a long enough time to learn the right way to do things may not be given as much of a second chance as a 21-year-old or 22-year-old student. It also raises the question about our obligations to teach and educate, and you raise that question. Are we doing a good enough job? Is some of the blame ours? And if so, that should enter into our consideration. We have had a number of too many U.S. university presidents in the United States who have been found, the presidents of universities, who have been found to have plagiarized their dissertations. This is quite interesting. They basically could have their degree taken away from them. What do you do with people like that? Fortunately, in most cases, if not all, they've resigned. But that's very nice. But it does raise the issue of all that one person has done since his or her era, if you will, back when the dissertation was plagiarized or whatever the case may be. What does that count for? If he or she has had a wonderful career, contributed a great deal to society, how do you take that into account? Those are not straightforward questions. I'm just raising them as questions. And I think if you decide that you're going to look at things at a case-by-case basis, then to be fair, there should be very clear criteria as to what you will use to make those kinds of evaluations and judgments. But I was moved by this case, and I know no details beyond your slide, but I'm happy you gave her another chance, and I hope that she proves worthy of it.
Yeah. Yes, I completely agree with you. Thank you for your comment.
Our engineering school, where we had quite a bit of misconduct undergraduate, a team did a study to try to get a better insight as to why students were cheating. And when you looked at that, there was quite a bit of faculty behavior that explained why the students did what they did. They don't read the papers, their assignments don't make any sense, they don't teach decent classes, and so on. Are you doing anything to look at the causes of undergraduate misconduct and then looking to see whether you need to discipline some of the faculty members who are encouraging misconduct?
Not yet. We are not doing this connection, this correlation, not yet, but I guess that you touched in a very important point, and I guess this is a mission for our super committee. So, I was just thinking during your talk, and I'm really sorry that tomorrow you are going to discuss about education, that in my point of view, everything should start and should move to, from the beginning, from the kindergarten. So from our students, we have to concentrate most of our efforts, but unfortunately cannot be here tomorrow. But for sure, what you just mentioned is a very important point, so you took a note. More work for you. Great. So thank you very much. If there is no further questions, I again